The early projections for the upcoming Hunger Games prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, have slightly improved since they were last reported back in October. In the past, they said it would probably make around $35 to $45 million domestically during its opening weekend, and now Box Office Pro has it making around $38 to $50 million domestically during that weekend. Despite all this, I still have my doubts that this movie is going to succeed at the box office when you consider that the budget is around $100 million, or at least that's what's being reported, which kind of puts it in line with other Hunger Games movies in the franchise. But at the same time, this is still projected, even on a high note, to be opening up at less than half of what the previously worst Hunger Games movie in the franchise opened at. One thing I'm curious about is kind of the media's reaction to what happens with the box office results to this movie, because in the past, when a movie fails at the box office this last summer, they've been saying like, oh, well, it was because of the strikes going on. They weren't able to promote the movie, and that's why it didn't do so well. Never mind the fact that there's actually been successful movies this last summer with the same no promotion aspect to it, but they just kind of ignore that because the media insists that you need to give the media interviews in order for a movie to succeed. But this movie's kind of unique in that they were actually granted an interim agreement from SAG-AFTRA even before the strikes officially concluded, which means they've had a couple weeks of promotion for this movie. Now, that's not a huge amount of time for it, but at the same time, it is some promotion. And if the movie does exceed the expectations and let's say made 55, 60, or even more $1 million at the box office during its opening weekend, then they'll probably say, yeah, you see, the actors being able to promote the movie was a contributing factor and that's why it succeeded. But if it's at kind of the low end of the expectations and actually maybe even underperforms a little bit, then they're going to say it was the actors not having enough time to promote the movie, which is why it didn't do so well. But having it kind of go below the expectations seems to be a little bit more reasonable when you consider that back in October, The Marvels was projected to make $55 to $75 million domestically during its opening weekend, and it only made around $47 million domestically during that opening weekend. So it seems to me that their projections from back in October were a little bit higher than what we could come to expect right now. So if they were saying that the Hunger Games should be opening around $35 million during its opening weekend domestically, then I think it is reasonable to assume that it could actually be slightly lower, maybe $32, $33 million. But despite all this, despite no promotion or even the actor Rachel Zegler being in this movie, I don't think that's a contributing factor why this movie isn't going to succeed. And I think it is really just the fact that people aren't interested in a Hunger Games movie at this point. I mean, we even got this article from Vanity Fair from the time that the book for this movie was announced. A Hunger Games prequel is on the way for anyone who still cares about Hunger Games. This article goes on to say that the book feels kind of like a cash grab, especially when you consider that Susan Collins, the author of the Hunger Games franchise, didn't really have a ton of success in the intervening years, and she was kind of running back to the well to what actually worked in the past for her. And also, Lionsgate Studios announced that they're going to make a movie based off of that book prior to the release of it. And in my opinion, it does feel like that they had her make the book just so they can make a movie based off of the book. And I don't blame them either, because they probably looked at the box office returns and saw that the series grossed nearly $3 billion globally during its entire theatrical run for the 4 movies, and they're probably trying to replicate the same success of it, but they captured lightning in a bottle with the original Hunger Games franchise, and even imitators at the time weren't able to replicate the same success of it. And that's really what this new movie strikes me as. It's just kind of like an imitation of the original, but with the Hunger Games name to it, they expect it to have the same built-in fan base. But this is set so far apart from the original movies that you almost have to reestablish this as a franchise to new audiences. And that means not treating it like it's the 5th movie in it, but actually, if it's the first movie, give it a budget that corresponds to that. And at the very least, you mitigate your losses. But I mean, if it is a success, then you have something that you continue on with. But I think the lesson to really take away from this is you can't artificially try to create something that's going to be the next big thing like they did with this Hunger Games movie.